5 days to go. 5 nights from right now, at this very minute, this hour, we will be counting votes in the election that could change America, the election that could change Donald Trump's life, both as a politician and the subject of a special prosecutor's criminal investigation of the president, and the election that could change your life. It will change your life, one way or the other. And there are only 4 more campaign days. 4 is the real number to think about. That's how many campaign days there are. 4. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. That's it. Then it's over. Candidates make their last speeches Monday night, and voters will start going to the polls early Tuesday morning. 4 campaign days left. And the challenge for Democrats is one they have never faced before. It is one that no party has ever faced before in the history of American politics. The challenge for Democrats is, how do you campaign against a pathological liar who is president of the United States? Now, 2 years ago, Hillary Clinton campaigned against a pathological liar who was not president. What's happening now is different, very, very different, because today, the pathological liar who is now president can say he is going to send American military personnel to the southern border. And it might actually happen, or some version of that might actually happen, because the pathological liar is president. Donald Trump can now use the presidency for campaign stunts, as he did once again today. He used the White House, the Roosevelt Room, which is supposed to be reserved for government meetings, and he delivered a Trump rally-style speech with no substance. He announced no new policy proposals. The White House lied and said the president was going to make policy proposals, but he did not. No president has ever used the White House as a campaign location 5 days before an election the way the president did today. How do Democrats campaign against that? How should Democrats campaign against these campaign stunts that are filled with pathological lies? That is a very difficult question. Now, no one should pretend that that's an easy question, and I know some people do. Should the Democrats fight directly against what the president says, or will that bring more attention to the latest lie the president has told? Like today, when the president said that when American troops are on the southern border, they will be allowed to shoot to kill anyone who throws a rock at them. The president actually said, quote, "We will consider that a firearm because there's not much difference when you get hit in the face with a rock." Donald Trump thinks there's not much difference between a bullet and a rock. Donald Trump has never served a day in the military. No one named Trump has. Not his father, not his grandfather. It's not what Trumps do. No Trump has ever served in the military or in the war of their era. And I know when I was a kid, I didn't know anyone in my neighborhood whose father had not served in the military during World War II or the Korean War. During Vietnam, most families I knew had someone serving in the military, including mine. But I didn't know anyone named Trump. Everybody I know knows the difference between a bullet and a rock, and the law knows the difference between a bullet and a rock. And if an American soldier standing anywhere in the United States shoots someone who throws a rock, that soldier will be arrested on the spot and charged with murder or manslaughter, because that soldier has no greater legal right to use a firearm in the United States than any other person living in the United States. Donald Trump doesn't know that. Donald Trump's voters don't know that, but Democrats do know that. Should the Democrats run out there today and say that Donald Trump is advocating that soldiers commit crimes on U.S. soil? As a presidential candidate, Donald Trump repeatedly advocated that the military should commit war crimes, torture in foreign countries, presumably. As a candidate, he said we should not just kill our enemies, but the families of our enemies and the children of our enemies, the babies of our enemies, all war crimes, all of that. How do you campaign against a pathological liar like this? Campaign managers and strategists on the Democratic side around the country have been thinking about this every day and every sleepless night. They think about it a lot more than you do or I do, and I don't feel smarter than any one of them. And their choice seems to be to run for the office, not run against Donald Trump, because running against Donald Trump is running against a moving target of pathological lying insanity. Democrats are making sure that voters know that Republicans have pledged their loyalty to Donald Trump, but most Democratic candidates are then spending most of their time telling voters what is at stake for them, the voters, and the way they live their lives, starting with their own health care and the affordability of health care in this country, the country where you can still go bankrupt if someday in a doctor's office a test comes out the wrong way for you. 71% of voters know that. 71% of voters say health care is the most important issue in this campaign. Donald Trump's choice, after seeing that poll, is to simply lie and say that he and Republicans will protect your health care and protect you if you have pre-existing conditions, even though they have attacked your right to have health insurance if you have pre-existing conditions, even though they have tried to rip those health insurance policies right out of your hands, which every single Republican in Washington has tried to do. Every one of them has voted to do that repeatedly. And so in the face of that Trump lie, the Democrats say this.
Universal health care just means that everyone can see that specialist, that primary care physician, get the mental health care they need to be at their best. Universal care in this state that has made it so hard for women to get a cervical cancer screening, to see a family planning provider, to see a doctor of any kind, that we are now at the epicenter of a maternal mortality crisis, 3 times as deadly for women of color in this state. Universal care can also mean that every woman makes her own decisions about her own body and has access to the care that ensures that she can.
When asked about pre-existing conditions by a reporter yesterday, Donald Trump actually said this word for word. What the Democrats are going to do is destroy our entire health care, and you're not going to have any health care. You would destroy the country. You are not going to have health care. Those are the words of a deranged man. How do you campaign against that? Much is being made of something else Donald Trump said in that same interview. Quote, "When I can, I tell the truth." And much of the news media has reacted as if that is a giant admission on Donald Trump's part that he doesn't always tell the truth. But what Donald Trump actually said there is a lie. He said, "When I can, I tell the truth." When I can? He doesn't tell the truth when he can. He lies all the time. He lies when the lie is instantly provable as a lie. He lies directly to people who he knows know that he is lying, looks right into their eyes. He knows that they know it's a lie, and he still says it. That is a sickness. The man is sick. He is a deeply perverse, pathological liar all the time. A rock is the same as a bullet. If Democrats are elected, quote, says Trump, you are not going to have health care. When I can, I tell the truth. Much of the news media now thinks that Donald Trump has admitted that he is lying about the news media being the enemy of the people. Reporter Jim Vandehei said to the president in an interview, I don't think you think we're the enemy of the people, do you? And Trump said, I don't. Now, why does anyone think he's telling the truth in that answer? Here's what I think Donald Trump means in that answer to Jim Vandehei. He doesn't think the news media is the enemy of the people. He thinks the news media is the enemy of Donald Trump. Donald Trump does not, has not, and will never care about the people. He cares about Trumps and not necessarily every single person named Trump. He clearly favors some of his children over others. He sees the news media as his enemy, and he is enlisting his voters to join him in seeing the news media as their enemy by telling them that the news media is their enemy, the enemy of the people. That sounds better than the enemy of Donald Trump. That wouldn't elicit quite as much support, a lot, but not quite as much, as the enemy of all of you out there in my red-hatted audience. So that's the way Donald Trump says it. Donald Trump believes and has always believed that anyone Whoever tries to tell the truth about Donald Trump is his enemy. That is his definition of enemy, and that is his definition of the political party he's running against, the enemy. American politicians have always understood prior to Trump the difference between the word opponent and enemy. The word enemy was used for foreign countries under declarations of war. An opponent, that word could be used reasonably in political campaigns and on the floor of the United States Senate, where senators respectful of each other rose as opponents of each other in debate without ever dreaming that the other senator or anyone in the other party was their enemy, just their temporary debating opponent. How do Democrats campaign against someone who will say anything when that someone is the President of the United States? Joining us now, John Heilemann, national affairs analyst for NBC News and MSNBC and co-host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus, and Jamil Smith, senior writer for Rolling Stone, who just profiled Florida Democratic gubernatorial nominee Andrew Gillum. And John Heilemann, when I watch these Trump events, as we watched today in the Roosevelt Room, there's the job I have, which is, what am I going to say about this? Is this something I'm going to ignore from him? How do I deal with it? And it might be that I don't mention, or I do, or I analyze it or not. But I also wonder what are the Democratic candidates thinking when they see these events? What are their strategists thinking? What are their campaign managers thinking? Is it something some of them need to jump out on? Is it something they shouldn't? They should just stay with what they're going to do that day? What are you finding when you're talking to the Democratic candidates as you go around the country for the circus, for your Showtime show, in how they are reacting on a day-to-day basis to the Trump madness?
Well, let me start by saying that opening was excellent, and I want to say, like Donald Trump, he says, "When I can, I tell the truth. When I can, I like to sit here at this table for the A block of the last word, so I can see it in person." It's like being at SNL mixed with a little like Shakespeare in the Park.
You get no more money for this.
I know.
Okay,
I know. So here's the thing. This week we're doing this episode of The Circus for Sunday, where we are in fact seeing as the Democratic bench, the top heaviest hitters, Joe Biden, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Barack Obama at the end of the week, Oprah Winfrey, all out on the field right now, basically saying we're trying to take on Trump. I've not seen all of them, but I just came from Elizabeth Warren. I spent the day with her with Richard Cordray in Ohio, just off the plane from Columbus, so I could sit here and listen to you do that excellent opening. I'll tell you what happened today at the two events she did for Richard Cordray. She didn't mention Donald Trump's name once.
There you are.
Not once did she mention it. And when I was with Cory Booker,
that's a strategic choice.
It is. And you noticed Oprah Winfrey did not go after Donald Trump today from a different point of view. You pointed out she's very political. I was with Cory Booker for four events in New Jersey on Tuesday. He mentioned Donald Trump at the end of an event for Menendez, where he was basically saying you got to re-elect Bob Menendez to stop Donald Trump. But over the course of about 4 hours, that last 10 minutes was the only time he mentioned Donald Trump. So I have found it super interesting, given that the one unifying principle of the Democratic Party over the last 2 years has been stop Donald Trump, opposition to Donald Trump, hatred of Donald Trump, fear of Donald Trump, that in the closing moments, the biggest guns of the Democratic Party are not talking about Donald Trump. They're talking about the things you mentioned before, the substantive issues. They're basically saying you can't deal with this lunatic. What you can deal with is the fact that he's a liar, and the way to deal with that is to talk about health care, talk about the environment, talk about jobs, talk about all of the topics on which Democrats are favored by the majority of Americans on the substance.
Jamil Smith, how's Andrew Gillum handling what the president does every day?
Well, for the most part, Lawrence, he's really trying to make sure that he focuses on the issues that apparently people care about. Health care, again, in Florida is a big deal, obviously. And then obviously you have him responding to the issues that I guess Trump brings up, but not directly to Trump himself. He's not going to necessarily comment on a particular thing that Trump says or does, but he is going to comment about the spirit of what Trump is doing. And I think that you've seen that in his ads. You've seen that certainly in his stump speeches and in his rhetoric. But again, I mean, I marched near him when he was at the Florida A&M homecoming parade a few weeks ago, and not one person on the side of the road was yelling, "Stop Trump," or "You need to do something," or "Help." They were asking, "Hey, I need a job. I need somebody to help look after my family. I need to make sure that I have health care. I have a brother in jail who's, what kind of future is he going to have? I need to know these very practical things that real people deal with. And I think that this sort of definition of kitchen table issues is different now in the Trump era. We're not worried about, what necessarily he's saying every day. We're worried about what he is embodying and how that is translating into policy.
Let's listen to what Beto O'Rourke said about the possibility of 5,000 soldiers being sent to the southern border. And Beto O'Rourke's in a spot running in Texas where when the president starts talking about the southern border, that's the border of Texas. So he's making the decision on a daily basis, at least on issues like that, to go straight back at the president because that is a local issue in his race. Let's listen to what Beto O'Rourke, by the way, lifetime resident of the border area in El Paso. Let's listen to what he had to say about it.
He wants to send more than 5,000 soldiers to this community and other communities of the border, demeaning the service and sacrifice of more than 20,000 Border Patrol agents who do an incredibly effective job of keeping the border secure and our communities safe. I want to make sure that we don't give in to that paranoia, that we don't submit to that fear, that we don't allow ourselves to be defined by walls 2,000 miles long, 30 feet high, at a cost of $30 billion.
John, some of the smartest things I've heard about the southern border come from people who live near the southern border, like Beto O'Rourke.
Right. Well, he lives in the city that is the most diverse in terms of Hispanic and white American city in the entire country, most integrated, the greatest balance there. And he's been living down there. He knows. I've heard him do this. We were together one night in Austin. We got to listen to him talk about this, talking about his uncle who was in law enforcement. The way he talks about the Border Patrol, the way he talks about it, he has had to be part of that community, not just representing it in Congress, which he does, but also someone whose entire family lineage comes from that country and comes from that city and has seen every side of this issue. And again, whatever you think about Beto O'Rourke's electoral fortunes down in Texas right now, you think about the contrast between how he talks about that issue, not someone who confuses, doesn't know what a bullet is versus a rock, and the way that Donald Trump talks about it, you recognize the difference between just reality and fantasy and delusion.
Jamil, what are you expecting to hear in the next only 4 days left of campaigning as closing arguments for Democrats?
Well, I think that Democrats would be wise to essentially couch the language of Trump within the real lives of Americans. I think that instead of saying that, oh, well, of course, this ad is racist and it's Willie Horton, this and that, they'd be wise to concentrate on how offensive it is that the Republicans are lying to them about health care, for instance. I think that they'd be wise to emphasize proposals about criminal justice reform and other things that you'll never hear a Republican mention. These are things that Democratic voters need to know that these folks stand on and that they're going to act upon if they're elected. We know that they're against Trump. They need to come to the table with a little bit more.
John Heilemann, Jamil Smith, thank you both for starting us off tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.